You have entered as an organizer and may now speak to any other organizers or panelists on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I guess my first question will be, can people hear me? Will somebody please write in the question box if you can hear me? All right, that's great. Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, a lot of people. Thank you so much. Okay, well, we all know why we're here. We're here because for the last couple of days we've been in a position where the servers at the Uspto have not been working the way they should. Today, supposedly, the contingency server is kind of limping back into action, but I understand it still won't work for entry into the U.S. national phase. And prompted by these recent events, I organized this webinar kind of on short notice. I'll tell you, one of the people wrote to me today and said, "Why didn't you give more advance notice for this webinar? I couldn't fit it into my schedule." And I wrote back and I said, well, if a couple of weeks ago I could have predicted that the servers at the USPTO would fail, then I suppose I would have announced this further in advance. But anyway, here we are, and we have two webinars. We have this one now on the topic of how to file by express mail, filing new U.S. patent applications, and in about 55 minutes, another webinar on how to do responses to office actions by fax and by postal mail. And so anyway, here we are, and welcome everybody. I see we have many attendees, well over 100, and thank you all for being here. Hopefully this will be a productive time. Okay, so you need to file a patent application or enter the U.S. national phase from a PCT, and you're doing it by going to the post office. And this webinar is going to talk about how to do it. Oh, by the way, some of you are going to want to download these slides later, and in one day, 24 hours from now, you'll get an email that will include both an evaluation questionnaire by which you can evaluate this webinar, and it will also provide a link to the place where you can download the slides. So that's how you can get a copy of these slides. All righty. First, some of you perhaps have attended webinars that I've presented, and you may already know that I'm usually fairly comfortable with people asking questions as they come up. So please don't be bashful. If you have a question, go ahead and write it in the question box when you think of the question. And in some cases, I might be able to answer the question at that time. Or in other cases, if I know that I'm going to cover the answer later, I might save the question until later. Standard disclaimer, if you attend this webinar or view these slides, it does not make you a client of our firm. It does not make me your attorney. This is not legal advice. If you want legal advice, pay for it somewhere and read 37 CFR 1.10 to learn exactly what the rules are about all this. Okay, I'll also mention that what some of you may already know about, October 16th through 18th, I'll be offering a 2.5-day live in-person PCT seminar in Redwood City, California. There's a cheaper price for registering that will be available until August 27th. And on top of that, if you use this coupon code POP-UP, you can get an extra $100 off the registration cost. Please send this link to your friends and colleagues at firms that might be interested in going to a live in-person PCT seminar. Okay. So, why are we here? We're here because sometimes the EFS web system has been broken, and astonishingly, what very often has happened, in fact almost always, is that the contingency server fails at the same time as the regular EFS web e-filing server. So we all have no choice. There's just no choice about it. We need to know how to do the things that we're going to talk about in the next few minutes, namely how to take a patent application to the post office, and you'll get credit for filing it in the patent office on the day you took it to the post office. There's just no choice. We have to know how to do this because sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Briefly, what are we going to talk about here? The procedure is you assemble everything on paper. You prepare what is called a return postcard, which we will discuss. You prepare a shipping label using what I call express mail because that's what it used to be called. Now the Postal Service has renamed it as Priority Mail Express. But anyway, watch for the word express. That's how you know you're doing the right kind of shipment. And importantly, your Priority Mail Express tracking number needs to be on the topmost piece of paper in the stack of papers that you're going to put into your envelope. Take it all to the post office and get a receipt showing what date you mailed it. Briefly, that's the procedure, and we will now spend the next few minutes going through all those steps in great detail. We should also remind ourselves that if the particular situation we face is that what we want to file is a Pct application, well, then maybe we don't need EFS Web at all. Maybe the fact that the USPTO system might not be available won't even have to be a problem. Just e-file it at the ROIB. To do this, you will use PCT Safe. You will use ePCT. Go to that website, pct.wipo.int, get a WIPO user ID and password. Go into their demo system and do a practice filing of a PCT application so that you can become familiar with it. It's important to have this in your skill set. It's important that you know how to e-file PCT applications at the ROIB because you never know when it might be important for you to be able to do that. Keep in mind, of course, that if your invention was made in the United States, before you file in ROIB, you need to make sure you have a foreign filing license. And keep in mind that if you are rushing to file a PCT, it probably means you filed a priority application 12 months ago. And if that happened, you probably have a foreign filing license in that application, in which case that foreign filing license might cover generally the technology that's in the PCT that you're getting ready to file. If you're going to file in the ROIB, of course, you need to keep track of what time it is in Switzerland. Go to the ePCT website and it will show you what time it is in Switzerland, so you can make sure you file before midnight if you're going to file in the ROIB. All right, returning now to 37 CFR 1.10, also known as Rule 10. This is the rule that defines how you do Priority Mail Express, formerly known as Express Mail, filings in the Patent Office by means of the Post Office. You need to print out that rule, study it, make sure you are completely familiar with it. In today's webinar, we're going to talk through the requirements of Rule 10, but you must not just rely on this webinar to know how to do it correctly. Also read and study the rule. Okay, now, details. Let's just go through some details one by one. By the way, I don't see any questions here. Feel free, folks, to put in your questions. Don't be bashful. Okay, make sure you know where your post office is. This may sound kind of silly, but post offices these days have the unhappy habit of closing or moving. Make sure you know what time it's going to be open. In recent years, post offices have reduced their hours. There are post offices that used to be open 24 hours a day, and now they close at 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night. There are post offices that used to close at 6 p.m., and now they close at 5 p.m. Know where the post office is and know when it's going to be open. One of the things that people usually worry about when they're taking an express package to the post office is that you got to get there by a certain time of day if it's going to get delivered the next day. But for what we're talking about here, that doesn't matter. There is no requirement that the package actually get to the patent office the next day. So don't worry about the cutoff time for next day delivery of express packages. Also, you're going to need to be able to prepare a shipping label for Priority Mail Express. This could be a handwritten label using a blank label that you bring home from the post office, but as I will mention, Click and Ship is the way to do it online. One of our attendees says we use prepaid express labels generated from a USPS.com account. Yes, that's a very smart thing to do. Can you get a stamp on that label? Yes. Old express mail labels still work, by the way, one of our colleagues reminds us. Even if your old label says express mail, it will work for Priority Mail Express. That's exactly right. Thank you very much for those two comments from our attendees. All right. I personally choose to use Tyvek envelopes when I'm sending stuff to the patent office by means of the post office. Tyvek has the advantage that it can't rip. If it gets wet, it won't fall apart. Tyvek, of course, is a registered trademark for a non-woven polyolefin fabric, for those among us who are picky about the precise chemical name for these things. In our office, we usually use a plain white Tyvek envelope, but you can get a Priority Mail Express envelope from the post office that is made of Tyvek. And if you do, that's a good way to do it. You can pick up envelopes ahead of time from your local post office. What else can we say about this? The post office does provide what they call flat rate envelopes. Priority Mail Express flat rate envelopes. And the great advantage to this is you don't have to wonder how many ounces is my package. You can print the flat rate postage, put that on the envelope, and then you don't have to wonder, is it going to be returned to sender because I didn't put enough postage on. The drawback to the flat rate envelopes is that they are made of recycled paper, which if it gets wet, will simply fall apart and turn to mush in your hands. So that's the potential drawback of the flat rate envelopes from the Postal Service. Nonetheless, if you are absolutely confident that the envelope will not get wet on its way to the post office, you could use their flat rate envelopes. One of our attendees asks, is a certificate of mailing still required? And the answer is, it was never required. You never needed a certificate of mailing if you were going to use Express Mail or Priority Mail Express to file a patent application in the U.S. Patent Office by going to the post office. There was never a requirement for a certificate of mailing. What you're probably thinking of is the certificate of mailing that you would use if you are using first-class mail, not express. And in 45 minutes, we're going to have a webinar where we talk about the use of certificates of mailing to respond to ordinary office actions when you're responding by first-class mail. Okay, so thank you for that question. No, you do not need a certificate of mailing to do what we're talking about here, which is filing a U.S. patent application by going to the post office. No certificate of mailing needed. All righty. So you're going to need a shipping label. And I think these days the cleanest way to do it is to use Click and Ship, which is on the website of the U.S. Postal Service. You use Click and Ship. You put in the address you're sending it to. You provide your return address. You pay the postage using a credit card, and it's a very clean label. It's easy to read. You can copy and paste the tracking number from the screen into your other systems so that you can track it later. If you do this, plan ahead and create a Click and Ship account with the Postal Service. Put your credit card in there so you'll have it for the future. And there's an address book in the Click and Ship system. The situation there is that you can then put in the address book, put the address of the USPTO. One of our people asks, can you use Priority Mail Express through the machines that are now found in the lobbies of post offices? I do not recommend it. As we will discuss later, you want to have a receipt from a human being at the post office. I would not use a machine that's in a lobby of a post office. Okay. Okay, so returning to Click and Ship here, So that, I think, is perhaps the best and cleanest way to prepare your shipping label. But you don't have to do it that way. You can get a sort of a blank label from the post office that's a 3-part carbon, no carbon required copy label, and you can handwrite everything, including the address for the Commissioner of Patents, which we will talk about in a minute. But Priority Mail Express is what we use, and we like it the best. What address do you send it to? This one right here, P.O. Box 1450. Don't send it anywhere else. Do not send it to the street address for the patent office. For Click and Ship, one of our people asks, can I create one account for all to access in our department? Yes, you can. And in fact, that's what I recommend. Use a generic email address. We use something like USPS3@opidol.com, and you log in, and and the credit card is there, the address book is there, and the single account could be shared among all the people in your office. That's what I recommend. Thank you for asking that question. Okay, you're going to have to make sure you put enough postage on. If you use the so-called flat rate envelope, the one that will fall apart if it gets wet, then you can just pay the flat rate postage, and it doesn't matter how heavy it is, as long as you can fit it in. It doesn't matter how much it weighs. Otherwise, you're going to have to weigh your package and make sure you pay enough money. You absolutely do not want this package returned to sender for insufficient postage. You will lose your filing date if that happens. Can you use Priority Mail Express to send to a post office box? One of our people asks. Yes, oddly enough, the post office can deliver mail to P.O. boxes. I know, it's surprising, but yes, the post office can deliver mail to P.O. boxes. Another person asks, you have a USPS corporate account. Yes, that's a smart thing to do. Years ago, we had a USPS corporate account, and that was a very handy way. You didn't have to weigh it. You could just take it to the post office, and they would charge it to your deposit account at the post office. So if you happen to have a corporate account, that's a very convenient way to pay the postage for your Priority Mail Express package. Click and Ship. If you're going to use Click and Ship, which is what we do nowadays, it's now that we're used to doing it, it's easy, we're familiar with it. You got to somehow get the label onto your package. And you can buy label paper that is 8.5 by 11 inches. It has 2 big fat labels per page. Each one is half of the page. You print your Priority Mail Express label on this label paper and then peel off the top half and stick it onto your envelope. That's what we do, and we're used to it. One of our nice colleagues in the EFS Web listserv mentions that he uses a spray adhesive. He sprays the spray adhesive on the back of the label and sticks it onto the envelope, and that's also very good best practice. Another choice, you got to do what you got to do sometimes. You're in a hurry. You don't have the right label paper. You don't have spray adhesive. Just take ordinary Scotch tape and tape the label to your envelope. If you got to do it, you got to do it. Okay, so at this point, you know what your tracking number is. And the key thing here, and you'll see this when you read Rule 10, they're very clear about this. The tracking number has to appear on the top sheet of paper in your filing package. It's just got to be there. If it's not there, you fail. You will then only get credit for having filed it in the patent office on the day that the package got delivered to the patent office, which is almost certainly at least 3 days from now, and it's almost certainly too late for the filing date that you wanted. Okay. If you're going to handwrite the tracking number, which I don't recommend, but if you are, proofread it carefully and have a second pair of eyes proofread it to make sure that you wrote the tracking number correctly. When it gets to the patent office, they're going to use that number in the tracking system of the Postal Service to see if you're making it up, if you lied about what day you took it to the post office. And so they need to be able to see the tracking number so that they know when you really took it to the post office. If it's illegible or if it got smudged, shame on you. Write plainly and in very large letters. What if you put your tracking number on the return postcard but not on the filing papers? Well, you can do whatever you want, but if you do that and it gets to the patent office and they don't see the tracking number on the topmost sheet, they will only give you a filing date that is the day they physically received it from the Postal Service, which is almost certainly a malpractice situation for the filing situation. So Yeah, you bring everything to the post office. You already had the tracking number before you went to the post office. This is my point. Before you even got in the car and went to the post office, you already knew the tracking number, in which case, because you prepared it with Click and Ship or you handwrote the label as you were sitting in your office before you got in the car. If for some reason you're going to do a handwritten label and you're going to handwrite it at the post office, why? Because you're technologically challenged and can't do Click and Ship or whatever, then yes, leave your envelope not yet sealed, get to the post office, write out your handwritten label while you're there, and then handwrite it on the topmost sheet, and then seal the envelope and mail it. If you have to, you have to. Okay. Next, can you use a clear Fedex window pouch to put the label onto the envelope? Well, you could, but the folks at FedEx will stick pins into your voodoo doll. They don't want you using the FedEx supplies that cost them a lot of money to ship packages with some other carrier. So I do not recommend it, because later you will feel pain in your joints in the places where FedEx puts the needles and pins into the voodoo doll. Next, where is the tracking number on the label? I promise you'll see it. You'll also see it in the Click and Ship system. The tracking number will start with 2 letters, and then it will contain about 12 numbers, and then it will end with US. You'll see it. I promise you'll be able to find it on the shipping label. Okay. Next, what is the topmost sheet? Well, it's whatever's on top in your stack of papers that's going to go into your filing package. What I recommend doing is, in the U.S. Postal Service website, when you're doing the Click and Ship, the Click and Ship system will display the tracking number on the screen, and you could then copy and paste that number very carefully into wherever it is that you're going to put it to be the topmost sheet. Prepare something in your word processor. Make sure you know which one is the tracking number. It starts with 2 letters, it has a bunch of numerical digits, and then it ends with US. Do not use like your transaction number or invoice number or something. It's got to be the tracking number. Okay. Next, the return postcard. Now, the rules do not require you to use a return postcard, but this is a best practice, and it's a crucial best practice, as I will now describe. You want to use a return postcard anytime you send anything to the patent office through the postal system. And in particular, if you're going to do the filing of a new U.S. patent application, you're going to want to use a postcard the way we're describing now. So how are you going to do it? Well, you're going to, I think, use a postcard that you bought at the post office. That's the best way to go, because then it's got a forever stamp on it, and you never have to wonder, did I put on the right stamp? You can make your own postcards on thick cardstock. Make it 4 inches by 6, not bigger than 4 by 6. You got to make sure there's enough postage on the postcard. You can use a forever stamp, and they have special forever stamps for postcards that cost 32 cents right now. Use a forever stamp. Do not put on a stamp that is so many pennies, because invariably what will happen is the rates will go up between when you put on the stamp and when you got to the post office, and then it will get returned to sender. It won't be delivered. So I would use a forever stamp if you're going to put your own stamp on the return postcard. What's next? Well, I know this is going to sound silly, but you got to put your address on the postcard. And the folks in the mail room at the post office tell me that about 5% of the time, the person did not put a mailing address on the postcard, in which case they can drop it in the mail, but the Postal Service won't deliver it because they don't know where to send it. It is a frequently made mistake. Next, on the postcard, you need to list everything that's in that envelope. So many pages of specs, so many pages of claims, so many pages of abstracts, so many pages of drawings, and so on. You could mention that you put in check number so-and-so and a certain amount of money. You could mention that you included Form 2038 to authorize the charge to be charged to your credit card. You could have a sheet of paper that authorizes charging to your Uspto deposit account. You could provide a transmittal letter, as we will discuss. The page counts are super important, because what's going to happen is the patent office is going to mark received, and they're going to drop it in the mail, and you'll get this postcard back, and it says that you provided 10 pages of spec. And later at the patent office, if they play dumb and pretend they didn't get page 7 of your spec, and they say they got the other pages 1 through 10 but not page 7, you can prove to them that it must have been there when they received it, because after all, the postcard came back and it said you gave them 10 pages of spec, and you can then hand in the missing page 7, and there will be no problem. They will not say that you were adding new matter. Are there different ways to separate or staple these things? My personal habit is to use a big black binder clip, not staples. If you use staples, then later they will use a staple puller because they have to run it through a scanner. And if you stapled it and they use a staple puller, likely as not, 2 pages will stick together because of the little indentations of where the staple used to be. So I just use a binder clip that's just barely big enough to go around all your papers. Use a small binder clip, not the big fat binder clip, but a small binder clip. And then I would just put everything in the exact sequence that you see it here. I would not bother to try to separate things, to separate the application data sheet from the claims or from the abstract. As we know, claims have to start on a new page. You were going to do that anyway. The abstract has to start on a new page. You were going to do that anyway. But just go ahead and do that. There are patent office personnel, actually it's a contractor, Reed Publishing. They go through, and when they figure out where the abstract begins, they put in their own separator page for how it goes through the scanner. So you don't have to worry about designating these things and separating them with paper clips or anything. Okay. So the main thing on the postcard is the page counts, as I mentioned. It will make it very hard for the patent office later to play dumb and pretend they didn't really get all the pages. Okay. The transmittal letter, although optional, is probably a smart thing to include. And depending on what you're filing, a design case, a utility case, a provisional case, transmittal letter makes sense. It provides a kind of a convenient checklist to you to help you remember all the things that you intended to put in the envelope. And you can put the page counts there as well if you want. You can use the transmittal letter as the topmost sheet that carries the tracking number. You can do that. That's one of the ways to put the tracking number on the topmost sheet. In the case of provisionals, by the way, best practice is not to use a provisional cover sheet. Use an ordinary ADS, Form AIA 14, and check the box that says it's going to be a provisional. That's what I would do for provisionals. Why? Because you want the automatic consent for the case to be released into the PDX and DAS system, which the ADS will do and the provisional cover sheet fails to do. Alrighty. Oh, I know you're all excited for the 11 o'clock webinar, the one that's going to start in just a few minutes, the one where we talk about responding to office actions and by fax and by postal service. And so I'm going to finish with a couple minutes left so you can run to the bathroom when we finish this one and still be back to your computer in time for the next webinar that starts on the hour that talks about how to do postal service responses to office actions and faxed responses to office actions. Anyway, so your package that you're going to assemble, you're going to put together everything that's going to go into that nice Tyvek envelope. And what are the things that are going to go in there? Perhaps an application data sheet, spec claims, abstract drawings, a check, maybe Form 2038 to pay the fees by credit card. You're going to want to, of course, run this all through the scanner so you have a nice clean scan that shows exactly what you put in the envelope, or a paper photocopy, or whatever your office practice is, and then make sure the postcard is in there, the return postcard. That does not count as topmost sheet. Okay. Next, you're going to want to cross-check and make sure the page counts all match. In our office, we have a second pair of eyes, a separate person who sits and counts the pages and cross-checks them against the page counts that are on the transmittal letter and the postcard. And to make sure all the pages are there. If there are supposedly 7 pages of drawings, well, they look and see if it's 1 through 7, 2 through 7, 3 through 7 to make sure all the numbers line up and so on. You'll see here I misspelled the word number on this slide. Please forgive me. I had to prepare these slides in a big hurry for today's webinar. You'll want to make sure the postcard is in there and then seal it up and hop in the car and head down to the post office. Your goal is to walk away from the counter with a receipt that has your tracking number on it and shows today's date. Nothing else will do. Nothing else will do. You need that receipt because later, because that receipt is tied to the fact that they scanned it into their tracking system at the post office, and that is how the Postal Service is going to make information available to the Patent Office that they will know that you didn't lie and make it up when you said what day you took it to the Post Office. One of our colleagues says that for the ADA, he normally uses Form AIA-14, which is set to upload data into the USPTO system when it's filed. Is it okay to just print this out and file it on paper? Yes, that's the right way to do. Or print it to cute PDF. That's what I do. But yeah, print it out on paper. That's what I would use. And then, make sure you have, I would go ahead and use an ink signature. You could also use the virgule, the slash signature. But yes, AIA-14 printed to a printer onto physical paper is the way to do it for a post office filing. One of our colleagues says, well, what if I'm handing in sequence listings? Yes, what if you are handing in sequence listings? Well, you could print out your sequence listings on paper and later hand them in as a TXT file. That would be one option. What's rough, of course, is that your sequence listing may be voluminous enough that it really contributes a lot to your page count. And if you go past 100 pages, you're going to get dinged for filing an oversized U.S. patent application. So if your sequence listing is only a few pages, maybe hand it in on paper and then hand it in electronically later when you get your notice of missing parts, or hand it in on a CD-ROM. Hand in your TXT file on a CD-ROM in the same package, and that would be the way to do it. And then you would list the CD-ROM as one of the items on your postcard, or you'd list the CD-ROM, and you would list the CD-ROM on your transmittal. Do I have to use a check or credit card? Can we use our deposit account? Yes, you can use your deposit account. And of course, the other thing to remember is that although some of you are old timers like me, some of you remember the old days where if you failed to hand in the money, you lose your filing date. That rule changed about 15 years ago, and you can now screw it up all you want. Fail to hand in the money, fail to hand in the correct amount of money. You don't have to hand in any money at all. That will not jeopardize your filing date. So if you're ranking all the things to worry about when you're doing a rush, we have to go to the post office because EFS Web is broken, do not include payment of fees as one of your worry items. Leave that as something that you have permission to not worry about. One of our colleagues points out that when you're stapling everything together to go in the envelope, which I don't recommend stapling generally, I recommend a black binder clip. But if you were going to staple things, don't staple the CD-ROM. Thank you very much. That's a very helpful practice tip. Okay. Now, when you're at the post office, what might happen is the clerk is going to perhaps lecture you and say, you're too late. If you want this delivered tomorrow, it's already too late. You say, I don't care, or use whatever polite language you use to communicate that it's not something that you care about. Tell them all you want is a receipt that says that today is the day you handed it to them, and that they can take as long as they like to actually deliver it. You need a receipt that says it was mailed today. One of our colleagues says, isn't a basic fee required to get a filing date for a 371 national phase entry? Yes, that is absolutely right. If you're entering the U.S. national phase, which you might be doing today via express mail, because the contingency server is still not working for national phase entry, yes, the base national fee has to be paid, or you don't get a date for having entered the U.S. national phase. Then the way to fix it, of course, is a petition to revive, which unfortunately costs $1,800. But yes, the base national phase fee is absolutely required to get a filing date for a 371 national phase entry. And you could use a check, you could use a credit card payment, you could use a deposit account authorization. Of course, that's right. Can you mail a classified patent application? Well, you don't know it's classified on the day you dropped it in the mail, right? You don't know. In which case you're innocent. And if they want to classify it after they receive the express mail package, well, that's up to them. But if you didn't know it was classified yet, then you can use the mail. I suppose what you're getting at is you might be filing a continuation or a divisional of a case that already had a security order on it, in which case this webinar is not going to be able to tell you how to deal with that problem. Is there a PDF of these slides available? Yes, tomorrow in about 23 hours you will receive an email with a link to the place where you can download these slides in PDF. If the tracking number is incorrect and you notice it before before it gets to the USPTO, are there any suggestions? No, you are out of luck. You will lose your filing date. Sorry about that. Okay. Do I have to pay the paper filing fee if it's the USPTO's fault that EFS Web is down? Oh, that's such a good question, and we will get to that in a moment. Okay. When you get back from the post office, one of our nice members of the EFS listserv reminds me that the receipt that you're going to bring back from the post office is probably printed on thermal paper and will fade, especially if you leave it out in daylight. It'll fade within a week. You put it out in the sun, it'll fade within 6 hours. So scan it or photocopy it right away. One of our people asks if you are doing a national phase entry, that is to say a 371, and if you do it by mail, by express, rather than e-filing, is the filing date given the express mail date box, or is it the 30-month date? It'll be the day you mailed it, and if the 30 months is not up, you need to put in an express request for early national phase entry. That's the answer to that question. But if you have time left before the end of the 30 months, another possibility, I hate to acknowledge that you might do this, but you might wait until the patent office fixes their server. But of course, you're going to want to enter the national phase as early as possible to get the most possible patent term adjustment, in which case you will put in an express request for early national phase entry, as well as satisfying all the requirements of Rule 10. Okay, now you're back from the post office. What do? You go to the USPS website and make use of their tracking system. You put in the tracking number. You'll click track. The first thing it'll say is something like, "Oh, it's not in our database yet," because their system is kind of slow. But eventually, sometime before the end of the day, it will be in the database at the Postal Service well enough that you can set up tracking, and you'll click on a link that lets you set up email notifications. And there's a place where you put in the email that you want the tracking messages sent to, and there's a place where they want you to put in your name. I would put your docket number into that field so that later when you receive the notifications, you'll know which file they relate to. One of our attendees asks, can we still fax patent applications? And the answer is no, you cannot, and you never could. It was never possible to send patent applications by fax. So don't think about using the fax machine to file a new U.S. patent application. You can fax to the International Bureau. If you're filing a PCT application at the International Bureau, you can fax it to them. There are 2 things or 3 things to worry about if you're going to fax a PCT application to Switzerland. Number 1, in today's world of voice over IP, you can't fax things that are multiple pages because it'll crash in the middle. Number 2, if you are going to fax it to WIPO, the entire fax has to get there before midnight. And so if your fax is going to take 45 minutes to finish and you start with 5 minutes left before midnight, you will fail. And thirdly, if you do fax it, the whole thing has to get there. Also, the image quality will be degraded because of the faxing process, and you need to send a confirmation copy within 1 month. But I do not recommend faxing patent applications to the International Bureau, and you are not permitted to fax a U.S. patent application to the U.S. Patent Office. Okay, docketing. You're going to want to docket this stuff pretty carefully, at least as aggressively as you docket normal events. First of all, you're going to want to docket to check to make sure the postcard gets back. And you're also, as a separate matter, going to want to docket to make sure that eventually you can see what you filed in private pair. Okay. One of our people says, will I amend the slides to include some of the questions asked during today's webinar? Maybe. Don't count on it. I'm also trying to record today's webinar, and if I'm successful in recording it, I will post the recording, and that would be a way that people could see, could learn about some of the questions and the answers. Okay. How are you going to know what your application number is? Well, that's a very good question. And part of the answer is that when your postcard comes back from the patent office, the application number will be on the postcard. Of course, the postcard might get lost in the mail or something. You can also perhaps find it in the financial manager system if your payment method was credit card or deposit account or EFT. you'll see it in the financial manager system. And finally, it'll be on your canceled check if you paid by check. And so that would be a way to find out. And then finally, assuming it does show up in private pair at some point, look it up by customer number. And if you're lucky, it'll be there in private pair, and then you can learn the application number that way. Penalty. One of our people asks, well, the penalty for failing to e-file, it sure wouldn't be fair to have to pay that if the reason you did it was because the patent office couldn't even keep their server running. If the server crashed and the devil made you do it, that's why you paper filed. Surely you shouldn't have to pay the money. And the answer is no, you'll still have to pay the money. That $400 penalty is in the statute. Congress decided back when they did the American Vents Act that they were going to be cruel to anybody who had to paper file because of the contingency server being broken, and you're going to have to pay the $400. The only comfort is if your client is small entity or micro, you'll get a discount, but you'll still have to pay the penalty. The penalty does not apply to provisionals, design, or plant patents. And then finally, ask yourself, why am I rushing to file this utility patent application? Depending on what the client need is, conceivably, filing an ordinary provisional might give you a stopgap measure that would serve the client's needs and save the $400 penalty. So consider whether a provisional by itself, perhaps followed close on its heels by a non-provisional, might serve the client's needs. The application number, one of our people reminds us, when you get the postcard back, it will be a number that is visible underneath a stamped barcode. That's exactly right. That's where you'll find it. Okay. We have now finished the formal part of today's presentation. I will ask if people have more questions, and I'll remind us that in about 15 minutes, the next webinar will begin. And here is the link to register for that webinar. I'll leave this on the screen for a minute in case people want to jot this down with a pencil and paper, or check the emails that you received. The same kind of email that told you about this webinar, you will have received a similar email with a link to sign up for the webinar that starts in about 15 minutes. But this is going to be the webinar on how to respond to office actions by fax or by postal mail. So I'll allow another minute or two for people to jot down this link. Can I repeat what will happen with the filing date when the Priority Mail Express is not at the top of the first page in the package? Well, if you fail to satisfy Rule 10, then what will happen is you'll get credit. Your filing date will be the day the package actually got delivered to the patent office, which presumably will be 3 or 4 days in the future. Can I file an appeal brief by fax? Yes, you can. And that will be one of the things that could be covered in the webinar that starts in about 15 minutes, is that, yes, you could hand in your patent appeal brief by fax. One of our people says, can I put the initial summary slide again on the screen so that you can screen capture it? We'll see. I got a couple more slides to click through, and I might be able to get back to that. We'll see. Can we mail an application that we know is going to be classified? Oh, please, please, please. I can't cover that in this webinar. If you don't know that it's classified yet, the law says you can file it, and later when they tell you it's classified, then you have to start following the classified procedure. But how did you know? You know because it's a continuation or divisional of a case that was already classified, then no, you can't send it by mail. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, everybody has copied down this link to register for the next webinar, the one that starts in 15 minutes. I will again remind you of the webinar that I'll be presenting in October. I hope we will fill the room. Please sign up for this webinar. Please recommend it to your friends, your colleagues. It's our first time doing an out-of-town webinar, live program, not webinar. Our first time doing a live in-person program out of town. I'd like it to be a success, and if the room is full, it's a success. So please recommend this to your friends and colleagues. Again, there's a normal price to sign up for this thing, but the price is reduced until August 27th. And finally, if you use this coupon, you can get an extra $100 off. And if you're going to put in for CLE, the package that you're going to receive tomorrow in 23 hours includes a certificate of attendance that you might be able to use to get CLE credit. You have to send it straight to your CLE office to keep our costs down, to reduce the price of this webinar that you just attended. We're not doing your CLE for you. You got to do it yourself. And please, 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 you have to go to this link to let us know that you sent in your CLE papers, because various states require us to keep records of whoever attended and claimed CLE. So please go to that site and tell us that you sent in your CLE papers to your CLE agency. Also, in 23 hours, you get a link to an evaluation questionnaire to evaluate this webinar today. Please, please, please make time to complete the evaluation questionnaire for at least 2 reasons. Number one, we are required to get evaluation results from people as a condition of this being accredited as a CLE program. And number two, if there was anything good about this webinar, it was because people in the past filled out their evaluation questionnaires and had their comments and suggestions, positive and negative. You will be helping future people. If you can find a few minutes to fill out the evaluation questionnaire, you will benefit people in the future. So please, please, please fill out the evaluation questionnaire. One of our attendees says, is it a requirement for the signature to be hand-signed, or can you use the virgule signature, the one between the slashes? Well, read Rule 4 carefully, 37 CFR 1.4, to see exactly how to do signatures. Slash signatures can be used on paper file documents as long as no handwritten information appears anywhere else on the page. But if there's anything handwritten on the page, the signature has to be a wet signature. But read Rule 4 so that you know exactly what's going on. I always ask the clerk to ink stamp the date on the receipt. Yes, that's a smart thing to do. They have the so-called ring stamp. They can print the receipt on their printer, and you can ask them to ring stamp it, and if they're willing to do it, that makes it even more official. So yes. With that in mind, we're going to go back to, at the request of one of our attendees, we're going to go back to that first summary slide. And let me just go there quickly. Back to that first summary slide, and then I have to clear the screen to get ready for the next webinar that is in just a few minutes. All right, let's see here. Just trying to see if I can find the summary slide that one of our people was asking for. Here we go, brief summary of procedure. All right, here's the summary slide that somebody wanted to copy down. Oh, no, there we go. So if you want to get a screenshot of this or something, and this is a summary of what you're going to be doing. With that, I'm going to declare a break here so that everybody can take bathroom breaks before the next webinar, which starts now in 11 minutes, the webinar on the topic of how to respond to office actions by fax or by postal service. Several people wrote messages to say thank you, and with that I will say you are very welcome. Thank you everyone for attending.